in a womb to save a baby and actually save a life, not talk about saving a life, that's something that nobody in this field can say. He's willing to go take that step, risk himself to get out there and do things nobody else has done. And he's brought teams together because he knows it's not just him. It's bringing people together. It's putting God first. It's trusting him and saying that we're going to take this nation back. But if we think one person's going to do it, that's not it. It's going to be us all. It's going to be every person in this room. It's going to be every person across Iowa. The media doesn't get to write the story. The media doesn't get to distort the words when you're here listening to him. So, without further ado, here, so you can hear it from his mouth, Dr. Ben Carson.
I'm so delighted to be here. Candy's delighted to be here too. Especially seeing all these young people. This is what it's all about. And really the reason that I got into this race is because, I spent my professional career as a pediatric neurosurgeon trying to make life better for young people. And realized that they are our future and that we need to be doing things to look out for their future. Very much so. I remember as a youngster, I actually had a pretty normal, I think, happy life early on. And then my parents got divorced. And that was devastating. I'm sure some of you probably been through that before. And I was always praying that somehow my parents would get back together. Every night I prayed about that. But it didn't happen. But, we were thrown into severe poverty at that point. And my mother worked extremely hard all the time. 2, 3 jobs at a time. She didn't want to be on welfare. She didn't like the idea of being dependent on other people. And she would leave sometimes at 5 in the morning. Would not get back until after midnight. Just working so hard, trying to make life better for us. And it was tough. It was tough on her, and there were rats and roaches, sirens and gangs and violence and all kinds of things going on. And I was a horrible student. Which one of you was a horrible student? Well, don't be proud of it. I was a horrible student, and I thought I was stupid. Everybody else thought I was stupid. And I remember once we were having a big argument on the schoolyard about who was the dumbest kid in the school. And it wasn't a big argument because they all agreed it was me. But then somebody tried to raise the stakes to who was the dumbest person in the world. And they tried to pin that one on me, and I said, wait a minute. I said, there are billions of people in the world. They said, yep, and you're the dumbest one. So we had a little argument there, but unfortunately that day we had a math quiz. Now, I did not do well with math because I had a basic philosophical disagreement with the math teacher who thought that it was important to know your timetables. And I felt that since they were printed on the back of the notebooks, you could get them anytime you wanted. But I couldn't look at it during the test. So I got a big fat 0, which is what I usually got. But the problem on this particular day was the teacher told you had to pass your paper to the person behind you, and they would correct it as the answers were given out, and then give it back to you, and the teacher would call your name out loud, and you would have to report your score out loud. Not a problem if you got 100 or 95. A major problem if, like me, you got a 0 and just had an argument about who was the dumbest person in the world. When I said that, they would all just laugh hysterically. So I started scheming. I said, I know what I'll do. When the teacher calls my name, I'll mumble. And she'll think I said one thing, and the girl behind me will think I said something else. So, when she called my name, I said, "9." And she said, "9? Benjamin, you got 9 right. Oh, this is wonderful. I knew you could do it if you just applied yourself. Class, this is a great day. Benjamin got 9 right." It had 30 questions. But she just kept ranting and raving. And finally, the girl behind me couldn't take it any longer. And she stood up and she said, "He said none." Just rolling in the aisles. And I was so embarrassed. If I could have just disappeared from the face of the earth, never to be heard from again in the history of the world, I would gladly have done so. But I couldn't. So I had to sit there and act like it didn't bother me. But it did. It bothered me a lot. Not enough to make me study, but it bothered me a lot. You know? I was still anxious to get out of school and go home and play basketball, baseball, football, dodgeball, any kind of ball, anything except study. And my mother was so concerned because even though she only had a third-grade education, she realized that education was the great divide. It was the thing that allowed you to chart your own course in life and not have to be subject to somebody else. And yet I was doing so poorly, my brother was doing poorly, and she didn't know what to do. So she prayed to God to give her the wisdom to know what to do. And you know, that's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. You just have to have faith. And she had faith that he would give her the answer. And he did. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was all that wise. I mean, turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? Making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read. And we didn't know that. And she would put little check marks and highlights and underlines. And I was not happy about this. Everybody else was outside having a good time. I was in the house reading books. But a funny thing happened. As I started reading those books, particularly as I started reading about people of accomplishment in all kinds of fields, and it became very clear as I read that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. It doesn't matter what somebody else says. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. You actually have control of your own life. And you know, once I came to that understanding, the fact that we were very poor didn't bother me anymore. It used to bother me to be poor. But once I realized that I could change that through the effort that I put into it, through the hard work that I put into it, to the dedication, it didn't bother me. And that's a very, very important part of what's known as the can-do attitude. The attitude that characterized the rapid rise of America from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world. You know, when Alexis de Tocqueville came to America in 1831 to study this nation, because the Europeans were fascinated. They couldn't understand how a fledgling nation, barely 50 years old, could already compete with them on virtually every level. It was unprecedented. It was unheard of. How could it be happening? So he wanted to come over here and study it and see if it was really true, and if it was, what was behind it. And he studied our government, the way that it was set up, and was duly impressed. But he said, let me look at their educational system. And he was blown away to discover that anybody finishing the 2nd grade was completely literate. They could read the newspaper. They could tell them how the government worked. They could have a sophisticated conversation. In Europe, only the aristocracy could do that. That was a big difference between America and Europe. And you know, that was the thing that really distinguished that population, made them different. And that's how, you know, they were able to move from one ocean to the other ocean across a rugged and hostile terrain. They knew how to build roads and structurally sound bridges and containment facilities and dams. They knew how to invent things when a problem came up. And that was one of the reasons that we rose so quickly from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world. And it's American ingenuity, innovation, and hard work. Those are values that we somehow have to restore. We got to get back to the can-do attitude and away from a what can you do for me attitude, which is in the process of destroying our country. And it has happened to many other countries before. When they tried to impose the utopian atmosphere. Nobody has to worry about anything from cradle to grave. The government will take care of your every need. The government knows what's best for you. The only problem is all those societies end up looking exactly the same, with a small group of elite people at the top who own and control everything, a rapidly diminishing middle class, and a vastly expanded dependent class. And if you've been very observant lately, you'll realize that's exactly where we're headed. Our middle class is shrinking, the dependent classes are growing, and the elites believe that they are in control of everything. And, I've noticed, since I entered the world of politics, which I never thought I would do, that the elites are everywhere. They're on both sides, and they truly do believe that they control everything, including the media, and they manipulate everything that's going on for their favor. And the real question, I think, in our nation at this point is, are the American people so far gone that they can be easily manipulated and not think for themselves and allow media sound bites to control them? That's the real question that we face right now, because that really is what will determine whether we continue on the same pathway that we've been on, or will we change it? Will we still allow the backroom deals and all of this subterfuge to control us? Because it cannot actually control us, we the people, unless we allow it to do so. If we're nonchalant, and if we're more concerned about the football game or who's on Dancing with the Stars than we are about what is happening in our country, about who are our representatives, and are they representing us the right way. That will determine what will happen to these young people and those who are coming after them. It has everything to do with us. And we also have to begin to think very seriously about, are we going to allow ourselves to be controlled by fear? And are we going to react based on fear? Or are we going to engage in rational thought process? And I speak specifically about terrorism and the radical Islamic terrorist jihadists who want to destroy this nation and everything that it represents. Now, the knee-jerk reaction would be, they're all bad people, let's just divorce ourselves from them. But I know that's not true, having grown up in Detroit, where there are a lot of Muslims, and I had Muslims everywhere. But it is important that we, the American people, understand that there are good people and bad people who are of a very different belief system than we are. And there was something called the Holy Land Foundation trials. It's started back in 2007. You should look them up when you go home. Holy Land Foundation Trials. Because during that trial, an explanatory memorandum was brought into evidence that told the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood in America. And you'll be shocked as you read those goals. To infiltrate our society, to gain positions of influence, to have a high birth rate, eventually to achieve what they call civilization jihad. And they said that would be easy to achieve in America because the Americans are politically correct. And they will be more concerned about our rights than they are about their identity and who they are. We need to know that. The American people need to be aware of that as we formulate our ideals and policies. So we want to be fair to everybody. And we want to be welcoming to people. But I think Teddy Roosevelt perhaps said it best over 100 years ago. He said, anybody from anywhere in the world is welcome to come to America as long as they want to be Americans and don't want to change us into something else. And I think that's what we ought to live by. You know, I'm proud to be an American. And I'm proud of what this nation has done. And there are those who like to denigrate our country and say that we're the worst and we've caused all these problems for everybody. But have you noticed there's a lot of people trying to get in here and not a lot of people trying to escape from here? That tells you that it is not nearly as bad a place as they make it out to be. And that's why we must protect it. And we're going to have to deal with reality. There are already jihadists here amongst us. It's easy for them to come through. You know, this summer, Candy and I went down to the border, the Mexican border, and it was fascinating being down there. You know, we've all heard the stories, but to actually see what was going on down there. I mean, there was a fence, but I mean, it was the kind of fence that would barely slow me down as a kid. And there was a place where there was a big hole cut in it you could drive a small car through. And they had put a couple of strands of barbed wire across that to fix it. The cameramen who were with us, they went through right there because they wanted to shoot from the other side. And they were not athletic people. So, I mean, it shows you how easy it is to get across there. There were no border guards. We saw not one border guard. All the border guards were like 70 miles inland. What do you need a border guard for if they're not the border? And, you know, it was really quite sad. And I'm talking to the sheriffs and the deputy sheriffs, and they were just giving us all these horror stories, how they put their lives on the line to capture people. And then ICE tells them, you gotta let these people go. Thousands and thousands of people. And they were telling, you know, a lot of those people are not from Mexico or Central or South America. They're from other parts of the world where they're likely to be infiltrated with terrorists. And then the amount of drugs that were coming through there. And they showed us whole warehouses and garages full of drugs. They said this is a tiny fraction of what comes through here on a daily basis. And there is so much heroin in our country right now. And so much addiction and so much crime associated with it. These are the kinds of things that are destroying our nation. And our federal government is doing extremely little about it. We can stop it. You know, in Yuma County, Arizona, they were able to stop 97% of the illegal flow. And how did they do it? They put up a double wall fence with an asphalt road in between so you had quick access. They put border guards every quarter of a mile so they were within sight of each other. Can you imagine that? Border guards on the border. And then they would actually prosecute first-time offenders rather than the catch and release program that we have now. 97%. Now the Justice Department, I guess they didn't like that efficiency, so they interfered with the program so that they could get more illegals through now. But, the point is, it can be stopped. If we really had the desire to stop it, we could stop it. And, when we're talking about bringing people into this country from outside, like the Syrians, we're presented with a choice. We either take in tens of thousands of them, or we turn our backs like cold, hard, disinterested people. Those are the choices that we've been given. But when I was over there 2 weeks ago and had a chance to talk to Syrians themselves, found out that their choices were really a much better choice. I asked them what would they desire. They said, we want to be back in our own country, back in Syria. And I said, what could America do and other countries do to help? They said, support the efforts of the Jordanians who've opened up these refugee camps, which were very adequate. They had individual homes for each family, educational facilities, and all kinds of possibilities for kids, hospital facilities. One of the hospitals was brand new. It was empty because they didn't have the money to run it. So I asked what the United States could do, and they said, support these efforts to grant us a safe haven until we can return to our homes. It's not that hard to do. And those are the things that we should be thinking about. The easy, logical choices. Not bringing them here when we know they're going to be infiltrated with radical jihadists. In fact, if we brought tens of thousands of people over here from that area and the terrorists did not infiltrate them with their people, that would be what I would call terrorist malpractice. I would be stupid of them not to do that. So, rather than expose our populace to that, let's take care of them over there. That's what they want, and that's what makes sense. The other thing we have to do is recognize that they really are an existential threat to us. So we need to get rid of them. And our policy should be aimed not at containing them, but getting rid of them. Getting rid of their caliphate, their oil revenues, shutting down all their monetary streams so that they can't pay people, taking out their command and control center, which is in Raqqa. There's only 4 ways in and out of Raqqa. You can shut those down and really drive them out of there. And of course, they'll go to another place that will become their command and control center. And you'll follow them there, and you'll do the same thing. And you just keep doing it. You keep following them around, and you eliminate them in the meantime. They won't have time to do anything over here if we keep them on the run. Mm-hmm. That's the way we should be thinking. It has to be very aggressive, but it has to be logical. And it can't just be reacting to fear and emotion. We're better than that. We also have to be thinking in terms of the future of these children. $18.5 trillion national debt, somebody has to be responsible for that. And it's still going up. And it's going to ruin possibilities for them. And it's worse than that because the fiscal gap, the amount of unfunded liabilities and programs for which we owe money versus what we expect to take in through taxes and other revenue sources. The fiscal gap, over $200 trillion. Somebody has to be responsible for that. And a lot of people say, it's just a number. It doesn't mean anything. Well, that's the same thing that many other pinnacle nations said before their collapse. Spain, France, ancient Rome, a whole host of people did that. And believe me, we will suffer the same consequences. And we must be willing to think ahead, not just react all the time. You know, think about our energy. This country is blessed with enormous energy resources, and yet we can't use them to drive down that debt because of these archaic energy exportation rules that were put in place in the 70s. We don't need them anymore. There's no energy crisis. We need to get rid of them so that we can make Europe dependent on us for energy and put Putin back in his little box where he belongs. But you know, you have to be thinking proactively, because if you keep the oil prices low, you contain him, because he's a one-horse show. It's energy. That's what he's all about. And we have multiple sources we can use for income. And you know, we also need to think proactively in terms of our electrical grid. Why should we wait until there's an electromagnetic pulse from the sun to knock it out and set us back decades? Why should we wait for one of our enemies to set off a nuclear device in our exo-atmosphere, which will create an electromagnetic pulse, set us back again for decades? What if they did that, and at the same time launched a large cyber attack across the nation, and at the same time exploded a couple of dirty bombs across the nation? What would happen to us? See, we need to be thinking about this stuff proactively and dealing with it in a proactive manner. And we need to recognize that by putting the space program on pause, we're also hurting ourselves, because so many inventions came out of the space program. That's one of the reasons that we were so far ahead with our military, some of the things that came out. Your cell phone came out of the space program. And you must remember that in the future, he who controls space will control the earth. We simply cannot do that to the future, to our young people. These are things we must think about. And then the last thing, there are multiple other things, but the last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'll open it up for a couple of questions, is the atmosphere that we are creating for the next generation. Our strength as a nation is in our unity. And yet we have allowed the purveyors of hatred and division to hold sway in our society, and to make us believe that there's a war on women, and race wars, and income wars, and age wars, and religious wars, and a war on virtually everything you can imagine. And we've stoked up the sensitivity, made everybody feel that somebody is offending you when they say something or when they do something, when you're really not even offended at all, but somebody's always stoking this stuff up. I, for one, for instance, am not afraid to say Merry Christmas to people. And nobody should be offended when you say Merry Christmas. That's the salutation of goodwill. It doesn't matter what their background is. We have to stop allowing the PC police to control who we are, because there are too many people who shed blood and gave their lives so that we could be free. And we disrespect them when we throw away those freedoms and kowtow to the people who are trying to control us. We simply should not ever allow that to happen in America. And that's the legacy that we want to leave to these young people. A legacy of freedom. And a legacy of camaraderie. We're not each other's enemies simply because you might have a difference of opinion about something. And this is particularly important for conservatives to understand, because conservatives, unlike the progressives, they get into their little funk and they say, well, I agree on 95% of things, but this one thing, that really sticks in my craw. I'd rather not vote. I think I'll just go sit home. Well, you know, the problem, that, by the way, delights the progressives. They love to hear that stuff coming from conservatives, because they really don't care whether you agree with them or not.
as long as you sit down and shut up, as long as you are not a factor, they're happy with that. But we have to recognize that when you don't vote, you are voting. But you are probably not voting for what you want to vote for. And it is so important in the election that's coming up, because we get another progressive and they get 2 or 3 Supreme Court picks, America as we know it is gone. You know, this is a time when we really cannot be playing around. We have to be thinking deeply about what's going on. And we must also be willing to stand up for our belief system. Our foundation in this country is a Judeo-Christian foundation. And I know the president said that it is not, but the fact is, he doesn't get to decide. We get to decide what it is. And we need to be very resolute when it comes to that. The principles and the values that made us great. And Thomas Jefferson perhaps said it best. He said the time will come in America where the people would not pay attention, and as a result, the government will grow, expand, infiltrate, and dominate, as they do everywhere. That's the nature of government. That's the reason that we have a constitution, to constrain the government, but if people don't pay attention, it will do the same thing anyway, which it is in the process of doing. But he said the American people would realize what was going on before we turned into another form of government. And they would awaken. And they would stand up. And they would regain control of America. And I would say now is the time to do that. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
I'm Ben Carson, and I approve this message.
We do have time for a couple of questions if anybody has one. Yes.
I'm a veteran, and I'd like to...
Thank you for your service.
What are you going to do to fix the VA system?
Okay.
Scandals, everything going on, getting these people out of office, and fixing the system.
Absolutely. Well, it definitely needs to be fixed. Just talk about the VA system if you didn't hear. And what are we going to do to fix it? First of all, understand how broken it is. 22 veterans every day commit suicide in our country. And that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of the problems, the frustrations that they are facing, and the lack of support that they have. So one of the things that I would suggest is we still have a voluntary military service, even though the number of applicants is down by 14%. And it's going to go down even further if we don't do something about this. I would have every person who registers for the military assigned to a support group the very day that they enlist. And that support group would be with them throughout their entire military career, especially in combat, and for a few years afterwards, and would begin working on integrating them back into society a year before their term is over, so that they quit on Friday, the next Monday they're employed. They have something to do based on their skills. I would also provide them with a health empowerment account that is subsidized, that would allow them to go to any medical facility in the country, and we would be honored to take care of them. If they want to go to a VA facility, they still could, but why should they have to drive forever, to do that? And one of the things that will do is that will force the VA system to make changes. Otherwise, they won't have anybody coming to them and they'll disappear. And they don't want that to happen. And I think you can also use the VA facilities for, research into traumatic brain injury,
post-traumatic stress disorder, limb replacement, and a host of things that are particularly relevant to veterans. The other thing that I think is important is we have got to build our military up again. You know, the Navy is at its smallest point since 1917, and the Air Force since 1940. And the sequestration has cut the heart out of the personnel, and the morale is so low. And these are not things that are good for us, particularly when the jihadists are building up. The last thing we want is our military to be going down while jihadists are building up, and their goal is to destroy us. It's almost, you know, you want to resist the thought, but it's almost like we want to be destroyed, some of the things that we're doing. And we've just got to be a lot smarter.